Once again, we are waiting on President Trump. He is set to issue an executive order that will launch an investigation into U.S. aluminum imports. Joining me now, National Review Editor Rich Lowry here in New York with me, Rhino Trading Partners Chief Strategist Michael Block. He'll have something to say about this. Republican strategist Ford O'Connell is with me, and Democratic strategist Don Calloway. And gentlemen, welcome to all of you. And, you know, Ford, I have to start with you on this one because this really echoes a promise that the president made on the campaign trail: protect American jobs and national security. This aluminum executive order does both. Do you agree with the president's move today?
Well, look, I absolutely do agree. He made the promise that he was going to crack down on trade abuses, protect American jobs. We're at the lowest aluminum production since 1952. We're down 77% since 2000. Understand who this really targets at the end of the day. Canada, who we take in 60% of our aluminum imports from, and China. And China's the real culprit here because they are basically flooding the market, creating excess capacity to drive down, prices, and basically throw American companies and workers out of business. So he's right under 232 of the 62 Trade Expansion Act to investigate this issue, just like he's done with steel.
You know, Michael, I want to pick up on that number because if you look at China from 2000 to 2017, they now run 53% of the aluminum market. That was about 11% back in 2000. So the Chinese, again to President Trump's campaign rhetoric, promises this goes back to the issue of China and the economic hit that we're taking from that country.
I think as the president and his team would say, free trade is great, but it has to be fair. Is China doing things? Are they dumping certain products like in the foil market I was reading about this morning on this market here? Is that driving down prices? Is that really fair? They're going to do this. They're going to do this very granularly is what we're seeing. When we saw it, we heard yesterday about NAFTA being potentially getting pulled, and suddenly it came back. There's some magic there where a lot of it has to do with Canada and the aluminum imports. Canadian producers like Rio Tinto, which is an Australian company, they have big operations in Canada, claim that their Canadian operations account for 150,000 jobs in the United States.
Okay.
If that's meaningful, certainly that's going to make President Trump say, hey, let's work on NAFTA. We want to be your friends, as opposed to China, where we say it's not fair. Maybe we need to use a carrot and a stick in various jurisdictions.
But here's the thing, Rich, NAFTA, that rhetoric, that language on NAFTA, why now? First, again, on the campaign trail, President Trump said, blowing it up, I'm getting out of it, right. Bad deal for America. Today it was, well, I like the presidents of Mexico. I like the Prime Minister of Canada.
Yesterday was very confusing, because I can see threatening to pull out of NAFTA, which I support and think is a good idea, but threatening to pull out of it as a leverage point for negotiations. But I don't understand floating that out there in the press. Someone leaked it. Apparently they're considering it, and then 12 hours later pulling it back. That doesn't increase your leverage. It doesn't make sense. It just confuses everyone. And on this issue of aluminum and steel, it's not a national security threat. We're not going to have a war with Canada where Canada cuts off our aluminum supplies and we can't build airplanes.
In the U.S., we only have one high-purity aluminum producer, one. All of that production, for the most part, has gone overseas. And we are making military aircraft and military vehicles out of that aluminum.
Canada is not China. And even steel. China does cheat. They flood the world market. They suppress prices. But in terms of the steel that we actually import in this country, the lion's share of it comes from allies, not from China.
Okay. Don, go ahead and weigh in on this. I mean, the president coming out. Again, these are campaign promises. He is the president. He was elected on the issues, in particular when it came to NAFTA, trade. All of this kind of is part of this executive order that he is going to be signing today. What do you say?
Well, when it comes to NAFTA, it's very clear that as is the case with a variety of issues with this president, he's now having to pivot from the bombast and braggadocio of electoral politics to making real policy, and it's very difficult now, which is why we see the tweet from this morning. It's very difficult to make that transition. But also when it comes to the commodities issue, particularly on aluminum, a very unreported angle here is that Goldman Sachs for the better part of the last 10 years has controlled the board seats of a company called Metro based in Detroit. And Metro created scarcity in the American aluminum market by warehousing massive quantities of aluminum sheets and have not let that get out into the American free market, which has created a space. It's created a space for China and created a space for Canada to be our major suppliers because they have manipulated that price unfairly.
Okay, Don, but Don, let me, I don't know the background on that, but Michael Block, can you respond to that? You're on the investment side of this. Is that true what Don is saying about this company?
With all due respect, what does Metro do? Do they make hats? I was just curious. I mean, there's bigger issues here. There's obviously some embedded interests at work here, and we're always going to be cognizant of that. I actually like the fact that this administration, and look, I have not been an unabashed fan of this administration. I've been very critical at times. But I do have to say, I like the fact that they are getting granular on free trade here, aluminum and everything else. You know, if you want to, if you want to
blame Goldman Sachs,
if you want to blame Goldman Sachs and and this conspiracy theory, I'm sure it's very interesting. But there's a bigger picture here.
It's not exactly a conspiracy theory. We can research it, and it's very difficult for the president to blame China or blame Canada when the reality is that Wall Street commodities traders here in the United States have a substantial part in the aluminum crisis.
All right. Well, look, traders do obviously follow the money and follow where the trades go, but the policy, U.S. government policy, trade policy, kind of dictates how they react. I have to say that from a business perspective, but I want to move on, guys, because there's another big topic that we're all excited to talk about still. Earlier today, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer slammed the president's tax plan, claiming it will only benefit the rich. Listen to this, guys.
I have never seen a tax plan that does more harm to the middle class and more to boost those at the top than the outline released yesterday.
Rich Lowry, surprised by his comments? You're probably not, but what do you make of it?
This is what Democrats have said about every tax cut plan the last 30 years. So they'll hammer and hammer away on this. I would like to see the administration and Congress try to do something a little more interesting on tax cuts to try to get a more working class element. I'd love to see a payroll tax be part of it, which wasn't part of that White House sheet, but maybe it'll come up further in negotiations. But the corporate tax cut itself is pro-business and it's pro-labor. Studies show that that tax is effectively paid by half of it by lower wages from workers, and that's something Democrats just don't want to understand.
They don't want to understand, and also, just to go back to what, and I said this on the program yesterday, right at the conclusion of Stephen Mnuchin and Gary Cohn's press briefing in the White House. I knew what the talking point was going to be. This helps the rich. Ford, it doesn't. This doesn't help the top 1%. If I'm in the top 1%, which I'm not, but if I was, I'd be upset yesterday, because especially if I'm living in New York or California.
Well, look, let's make the following point. The only way we're going to kickstart this economy is through tax reform, both on the individual and the corporate side, and that's what this does. But understand what Chuck Schumer and the Democrats are interested in. They're not interested in tax reform and putting Americans back to work and job growth. They're interested in basically winning the House in 2018 and making Donald Trump not a one-term president, but a two-year president, and that's what this is all about. He's going to scream from here till the cows come home that this is a handout for millionaires and trillionaires, but it's really not, and it's really the only way we're going to get it to work. And what this means is, unless President Trump comes up with something that is revenue neutral, Democrats in the Senate are not going to pass this where you need 60 votes. So what Republicans are going to have to think about going forward is using budget reconciliation, meaning that it has to be revenue neutral and therefore passed by Republicans only. No matter what Donald Trump does, 8 Senate Democrats are not going to jump on this come hell or high water.
They're going to criticize him with something that they've been saying for, we had 8 years of, let's tax the 1%. Didn't help, did it? I mean, that's what we learned under Barack Obama. And you know what, Don, at the same time, at the end of the day, those reporters in the briefing, yesterday, the clause came out. They went right after Mnuchin and Cohn and said, well, what about the middle-class family? What about them? And his response was, they get a tax cut. That didn't change overnight, but still Schumer coming out and, using the same old tagline again.
The middle class does get a tax cut. We see that the standard deduction is doubled here from $12,000 to around $24,000.
Thank you for admitting that, Don.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I think you're the first Democratic strategist to admit that to me today. I really appreciate that.
He's a capitalist.
Listen, I'm a capitalist, and more importantly, I'm intellectually honest. However, it's important to remember that none of this legislative process exists in a vacuum. So what happens when we delete the health care spending deduction, which the president also proposed via Secretary Mnuchin yesterday? So that if you have any substantial health care expenses in your household, that takes away a lot of the tax break that middle-class families might get.
We're going to be talking about health care in a moment, Michael, but back to the bracket system. I mean, they made very clear points yesterday. We have 7 brackets. We cut it down to 3. We have a tax code that is a morass. The average American can't do their taxes anymore. So I may not go out and buy, shares of H&R Block tomorrow. As an American, I'm pretty excited about simplifying what has become ridiculous. And remember, John F. Kennedy cut taxes. Reagan cut taxes. It spurred economic growth. They said the same thing yesterday. 3% economic growth. We're going to see that. That's how you pay for this.
Yeah, well, a lot of it for me comes down to is what other motivations do you provide for corporates and individuals? Now, we could talk about investment tax credits. For me, you can cut the corporate taxes. I want to see part of that come in the form of incentives to train workers to invest in capital spending in the right way. Not bad investment, but good investment, helping to increase productivity, whether it's on the CapEx side or on the labor side. That's what gets wages up. That's what leads to prosperity. If they can incorporate something like that,
I agree
that
with
would be
you.
exciting on the corporate side.
And you know what? I agree with you because, Rich, that point came out yesterday that these big U.S. companies, think your Apple, your Facebook, whoever, who have so much money overseas, trillions overseas, we need to get them to bring that money home, but they also need to hire at home. And they could take that tax cut and open up a new, facility in China. That could happen. He makes a good point.
Well, I don't see any policy you can really reasonably implement to stop them from doing that. I think the name of the game is a much bigger carrot rather than a stick. And the carrot is having an actual rational corporate tax system here, where we have one of the highest rates in the advanced world that doesn't generate that much revenue because it's cut through with all these loopholes and special interest exemptions. Get it down to around 15. Make it more rational. Make it more attractive for corporations to do business here.
Cheryl, to Rich's point, he's absolutely right about the corporate tax code. But what you have to do here is, if you want them to invest more in the U.S., is you have to make it permanent. Because the one thing I hear over and over for companies is, great, if we get tax reform and it's not permanent, it's going to reduce my long-term incentive to invest right here in the United States. So to Rich's point, he's absolutely right. We've got to lower it to 15% and close all those loopholes. And if you do that, then you have certainty and you're more likely to have them invest in the U.S.
We are going to be talking about tax reform for a long time, and I can't wait. I'm so excited. Rich, Michael, Ford, Don, thank you. That was a great discussion. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
All right.